Conservatism builds a large part of its general outlook on politics upon history, tradition, and previous success that has improved their nations, but the left, in stark contrast, is only interested in moving forward, no matter those who are left suffering behind them in the rubble. And to illustrate this, I have for you, dear viewer, compiled a list of 5 of the many gigantic screw-ups which have been supported and carried out under the flag of social justice by the political left in Sweden, but also in the US. In this list are acts which have directly hurt the very people that the champions for social justice claim to be protecting. And I think this list is valuable to make as a wake-up call for some social justice warriors on the left who are constantly using historical events, like the ones I'm now going to talk about, as examples of victories won. Because they sure as hell weren't. We today know that AIDS, or acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, is an illness caused by the HIV virus that is spread through sexual intercourse or blood by, for instance, sharing needles for drug use. It can also be spread from a mother to her child during childbirth or by blood transfusions, but these two last contamination risks are more or less rendered non-existent in the West due to modern medicine and strict controls of blood samples and antiretroviral therapy for infected mothers, which leaves us with unprotected sex and drug use as the primary way to get infected by the HIV virus. We today also know that people who practice unprotected anal intercourse have a higher risk of getting it. But our honesty about this fact hasn't always been the case. The public consciousness about HIV and AIDS increased in the early beginning of the 1980s, primarily due to the rapid spread of it among homosexual men. Politicians during the time did propose allocations of additional funds to help stem the rapid spread among gays, but several leaders within the gay rights activist movements instead replied by calling such financial aid cynical and homophobic. So several Democrat politicians were reluctant to act since they feared that they'd lose the gay vote by supporting these extra resources being put in place. They bought the gay right activist slogan, "Sex doesn't cause AIDS, a virus does." This despite clear evidence coming from a majority of US health experts on the topic, collectively stating that it was gay sexual interactions that was mostly to blame for the rise of AIDS that was killing young men. In 1983, Andrew Moss and Michael Gorman, both researchers at UC San Francisco Medical Center, finished a study showing that 1 out of 303 single men in the Castro area in San Francisco had been diagnosed with having AIDS. The study was viciously attacked, and when it later got leaked to the journalist Randy Schiltz, who himself is gay, he began being bombarded with calls from people from different gay right groups telling him to absolutely not publish the information that could be found in the study. Randy Schiltz published it anyway because he thought that the people had a right to know, but later said, I quote, "In 8 years as a journalist, I have never been under such pressure to suppress a story." So as a direct result of leading figures fighting for gay sexual liberty and against homophobia by suppressing health information about AIDS, young gay men died in cities like, for instance, San Francisco during the 1980s. And it was all just because these gay right activists didn't want to provide political ammunition for American fundamentalist Christians or just moralists in general. And they did this rather than to be forced to admit that gay sexual liberty had its darker dimension regarding health that needed to be brought to light. Later during the 1980s, liberal actors in Hollywood got wind of it and proceeded to blow the AIDS issue, which at that point was already accepted as a problem, into gigantic proportions. But that was only after doctors and brave journalists like Randy Schiltz had already paved the way for them on the issue of AIDS, and in practice let them simply kick in a gigantic, already open door. Weak laws regarding crime has historically several times been shown to primarily hurt minorities. In 1986, the US Congress passed the Anti-Drug Abuse Act. The law differentiated between the sentences you would receive for selling crack cocaine in comparison to selling powder cocaine. The law said that 1 gram of crack cocaine were to be viewed as 100 grams of powder cocaine. This was done in order to clamp down on the drug sales of crack in inner cities. And the people who got hit the hardest by it was black Americans, because typically it was black drug dealers who sold crack and white drug dealers who sold powder cocaine. But the law was widely supported by African American congressional officials and also received support from the law enforcement on the ground, no matter race, mind you. So black people supported locking up black people. Now why was that? Well, they saw blacks killing blacks and black families being ruined through substance abuse, and they basically saw their black communities going down the shitter. In short, they wanted the drug dealers off the street at any cost and wanted to send a clear message. Also worth mentioning is the fact that none of the black members of Congress said that they viewed the law as being racist. But Barack Obama did, and years later, in 2010, he pushed through the ironically named Fair Sentencing Act. The law severely softened the punishment for selling crack cocaine, and 1 gram of crack was now only to be viewed as 18 grams of powder cocaine in the eyes of the law. And this was all done in an effort, according to Obama and anti-racist interest groups, to fight back against a racist law that discriminated against black Americans. It was in practice a band-aid on the sore knee of crack dealers, an idea stemming from the logical abortion known as overrepresentation isn't the same as discrimination. And after all of these years, the do-gooders on the left still haven't figured this out. Just because a group is overrepresented doesn't mean that they're discriminated. Anyway, this new law later turned out to come and bite Obama in the ass because the punishment for selling crack and the reason that it was so tough was due to the fact that its dealers and users commit extremely high levels of violence, which is more common and far from being rivaled by powder cocaine users who more often just commit less serious crimes like petty theft. The drug in itself is the actual problem in this case, since crack results in more aggressive behavior than powder cocaine. Way more, in fact. That was the reason to why black congressional officials wanted to make it hurt real bad to get caught selling crack, since its prevalence got gigantic amount of black, often young men, murdered. Not including, of course, all the black innocent bystanders getting hit by stray bullets in turf wars over dealer hotspots to sell previous mentioned crack. The 100-to-1 ratio on the punishment for dealing crack cocaine was in fact an African American proposal, far more than it ever was a white American one. And this is a very inconvenient fact for professional victims like Tariq Nasheed, who likes to blame the white man for every single black person behind bars. And despite cops allegedly hating black people, a majority of people within law enforcement didn't support Obama's idea since they knew that the result would be more shootings and more thugs in the streets. But white middle-class Americans on the left in their gated communities, they thought that it was a great idea and they cheered for Obama in 2008 when he on the campaign trail revealed his plans to propose such an anti-racist bill. But when they later found out that even though he would lower the punishment for violent gang members selling crack, he still wouldn't legalize marijuana, a harmless weed full of different medical benefits. So he quickly lost support from a bunch of libtard millennials who'd hoped Obama would legalize something that their hip president had even smoked himself in his youth. He later pussied out completely regarding the whole issue with marijuana and more or less just passed the ball on to Congress at about the same time he left office. With other words, he's a fucking hypocrite because there's people being locked up for several years only for possession of marijuana, but he's going soft on crack dealers just because they happen to be black. But before packing up, he used his authority one last time to shorten the prison sentence for convicts who'd committed federal drug crimes like Daryl Lamar Reed, a crack dealer who ran one of the biggest drug organizations in Oakland and who got caught processing 20 kilograms cocaine into crack. This man got described as being behind some of the worst massacres of black people by the police of Oakland. So the people fighting against racist drug laws decided to make it easier for dangerous drug convicts to get out of jail and stay out and keep selling an extremely dangerous drug in their already troubled neighborhoods. Neighborhoods where the primary victims of these hundreds of drug-related stabbings and shootings each year were, and are still today, black. The only sound thing to do related to the criminalization of drugs is to stop doing it. But there exists extremely dangerous people today who have profited for years from the drug business, meaning that they should stay locked up even if you'd actually legalize drug use. The Mexican cartels have been hemorrhaging money all since more and more states have begun to legalize marijuana, and one of Obama's greatest fuck-ups regarding drugs is to have done nothing to legalize them, and instead just softened punishments for dealers while still keeping it profitable for them to sell drugs when they get out. Either legalize that shit or don't, and don't just cuddle drug-peddling gangsters only because they happen to be black. It all comes down to two questions that Obama should have asked himself. Number 1. Would I use crack or meth or heroin if it was legal? Because most people with a functioning brain would say no to that question. Number 2, if you lived in abject poverty and you got the chance to become a dealer and get the money needed to put your kids through college, would you take it? A lot of people would actually say yeah, but remove the profit and people won't take the risk and crime will as a result drop. Because if marijuana, for instance, would nationally in the US be made entirely legal tomorrow and be able to be mass-produced by professional companies or just home growers, low-life scum would drop it like yesterday's news. They would never be able to compete, neither in quality or in quantity. And the same goes for crack. If made legal, dealers would be stuck on the street corner with some low-potency slag cut with cough syrup while reminiscing about the good old days when that shit was still profitable and worth the time to make. Crackheads would still be a plague on society, but they wouldn't need to mug people in order to pay for their filthy habit. It would be cheaper, safer, and cause less crime. So-called anti-racist drug laws are virtue signaling bullshit that is just a distraction from the real problem at hand. So, I've covered this topic in a previous video that I made, and you can find a link to the video in the description. This is one of our Swedish social justice warriors' worst crimes, and its most central offenders are Swedish feminists. It's for years now been popping up cases about female refugees, some of them being mothers, being brutally raped and beaten in refugee centers by male refugees. The men commit these acts since they view women traveling alone without a husband as just being a piece of meat that is up for grabs. And the situation is naturally the worst for Christian women who, besides being unaccompanied by a man, also are not Muslim and as a result are considered to be lesser. But feminists and refugees are welcome activists have as a reaction to these disgusting crimes against women taking place in refugee centers, only chosen to muddy the waters by going on about how we shouldn't attribute this behavior to all male refugees, only to then start meandering on about racism. And while this is going on, already vulnerable and traumatized women keep getting sexually assaulted and beaten with little to no aid coming their way. And if they do get asylum in Sweden, this shit will follow them into the suburbs where the women still feel that they get harassed by men and are unable to live freely and feel safe. Officials at these refugee centers have repeatedly said that they're not properly equipped to handle these kinds of problems, and the people who have been brave and stood up to condemn the clearly religious and culturally motivated horrible treatment of these women have gotten their careers stained by racist accusations and claims about them being pawns for the far right. So our Swedish feminists have been beyond useless regarding these issues and have, through their cowardice in the face of genuine patriarchy and demonizing of those trying to actually help women, in practice made sure that these refugee women remain voiceless victims of sexual violence. And to make matters worse, our migration agency have been transferring serial rapists between different refugee centers if they commit an assault, and have most often not deported them. So rapists have been passed around like hot potatoes between these different centers and are, as a result, actually hurting even more women who are not aware of these men's previous offenses. The rapes have also not only been focused exclusively on women. Children, especially young boys, have been brutally raped by male refugees due to our authorities' complete incompetence regarding age testing. This has resulted in grown men being allowed to share rooms with young boys. So women and children got raped and beaten because people, primarily on the left, refused to admit that there are cultural problems being carried into the EU like luggage by people from the Middle East and Africa. The left don't give a shit about Jews. This isn't a generalization, in fact I'm being generous here. I'm implying that they're apathetic towards all the shit that Jews get flung at them here in Sweden, while in fact a lot of people on the left outright hate Jews. And it's a claim that is time and time again backed up by, for instance, our Swedish left's complete silence regarding Muslim groups inviting openly anti-Semitic speakers to their lectures, or how the left staunchly defends Al Jazeera, a Qatari-funded network where one of its most popular hosts has said that suicide bombings by Palestinians against Israelis should be specifically aimed at pregnant Israeli women because they'll otherwise, I quote, create Israel's future soldiers. Such disgusting comments and the silence they receive from the left are common, and whenever a Muslim hate preacher decides to take a shit on Jews, the Western left is always ready to get down on its hands and knees and wipe it up. British Labour leader and bum lookalike Jeremy Corbyn at a conference called Meet the Resistance hosted by the organisation Stop the War Coalition had this to say.
I want to first of all say thank you everyone for being here tonight and say that tomorrow evening it will be my pleasure and my honour to host an event in Parliament where our friends from Hezbollah will be speaking. I'd also invited friends from Hamas to come and speak as well. Unfortunately, the Israelis would not allow them to travel here, so it's going to be only friends from Hezbollah. So far as I'm concerned, that is absolutely the right function of using parliamentary facilities to invite people from other parts of the world.
Corbyn also said in 2009 that he thinks that Hamas should be removed from Britain's list of banned terrorist groups, this being the same Hamas that wants to see the complete and utter eradication of the State of Israel. And we in Sweden have recently had people like Palestinian former terrorist hijacker Leila Khalid being invited by Sweden's Communist Party in Gothenburg, both the 1st of May 2011 and on the 1st of May 2016. Khalid is canonized within the pro-Palestine left despite having been a member of a terrorist organization that attacked Israelis' embassies, kidnapped and killed Israeli civilians, and carried out suicide bombings. She has also several times compared the US to Nazis, which is beyond ironic considering her own seething hatred for Jews. And several people in the Swedish political establishment and left-wing intelligentsia have also talked about there being a Jewish conspiracy in place that controls Swedish media. A similar comment coming from someone on the right would mean the end of his or her political career, but left-leaning politicians keep staying in high political positions most often without facing any reprisals for inviting or supporting outspoken anti-Semites. The left's allegiance with our constantly growing Muslim population has led to that more and more Jews in Sweden are afraid and they fear for their safety if they'd practice their religion openly or in any other way express their Jewish identity. Anti-Semitism has grown radically in Sweden due to the ignorance of the left and the Muslim hate preachers that they protect while they push the entire blame over to the political right. And there are idiots everywhere in this country swallowing their scapegoating without batting an eye, despite the fact that our minuscule far right in Sweden possesses close to nothing when it comes to having a political voice. The fact that some people are actually surprised over the fact that there are Jews, Christians, Syrians, and Kurds who are supporting the Sweden Democrats in growing numbers is just laugh-worthy. Of course they are. They don't want to have Turkish nationalists or jihadists or other scum in this country. I've never viewed myself as being privileged due to my race or my class. I'd only ever agreed that I've had the privilege of being born into what is described as being the nuclear family. Both of my parents married very early and remain married to this day. That gave me an edge, because it's several times been shown that children born into families with two married parents who live in a monogamous relationship get better odds in life. They do better in school and are as a result less likely to live in poverty, and they also commit less crime. But despite the plethora of studies proving this fact, feminists and leftist bureaucrats have for years waged a non-stop war against the traditional family. And once again, it has hit minorities the hardest. The US Census shows that the poverty rate among single parents with children in the US was 36.5% during 2008, while among married couples with children that number was only 6.4%. Being born in a family with married parents reduces your risk of living in child poverty with 80%. And despite such statistics, third-wave feminists have been demanding government-funded services to provide for single mothers in order to provide economic freedom for women and to fight poverty by giving them a chance to get educated. But education can rarely compensate for the loss of another parent in a family's economy, and social justice activists, they usually don't think very far. Because this economic freedom for women paid for by the state ended up becoming a wedge between husband and wife. First off, it gave an easy way out for the man, since he knew that the state would provide for his wife and child. And it encouraged women to get rid of their husbands, since their welfare checks actually got cut by several percent only due to the husband's very presence in the house. So in practice, these types of social systems penalize parenthood and make it easier for families to break apart. The state took on the role of husband and father, and by looking at the numbers we can see that they have without exception failed miserably at the task. We in Sweden have a myth that is being spread around by the left about immigrants' allegedly stable family units, which are claimed to be much stronger than European immigrants or native Swedes, but the opposite is in fact true, as it very often is when it comes to the left and their claims. Immigrants from outside of Europe belong to the group of people who get divorced the most, and in the majority of the cases, it's the immigrant woman who leaves her husband. Despite often being threatened by her husband and by her family as a whole, women from, for instance, Iran are 4 times more likely to get divorced than an ethnic Swedish woman. And the left also fails to see the irony in them praising women from outside of Europe getting divorced, as in it being an act of female liberation, when these women are in fact most often getting divorced to escape from non-Western cultural norms. But despite the clear benefit of increasing liberty for these women, they do raise the statistics regarding children growing up in single-parent households. This is clearly shown not only here in Sweden during the years of our growing suburbs with their now seemingly permanent welfare dependency and criminally active young men, but also after Lyndon B. Johnson started his war on poverty in 1964 in the US. Because before he started his campaign in the form of a tidal wave of different government programs to help the poor, primarily blacks and Latinos, the rate of out-of-wedlock children was 3 times lower than after his war on poverty. Billions being spent in government programs resulted in that single-parent households as a result greatly increased, since young mothers saw few negative consequences in getting pregnant, all while fathers were increasingly encouraged to leave due to having a negative effect on the household income. And the fact that the black father is still today stereotyped as being unlikely to stick around is a legacy of this. Because black fathers to a way higher degree stayed with their families all up until the 1960s, and studies have today shown that one of the absolutely most critical factors to keep a child out of a future life in crime is to have a father in his or her life. Here, I clearly want to insert a caveat addressing my far too few female listeners and say that I do not at all minimize the worth of the mother in bringing up a well-functioning member of society, or encourage women to be economically dependent upon a man for that matter, or just stay with her man as a matter of principle despite being treated poorly. All that I'm saying is that the role of the father in the West has been watered down to the point of it being viewed as replaceable by a check from the government each month, and that has been shown to be a problem. And then we have the social programs pushed through by the left that actively encourages people to stay unemployed. Several Western government programs, including programs here in Sweden, indirectly punish you for working. For example, I used to have a job delivering newspapers to people at night using a trolley. It was a shit job and I froze half to death doing it, and I often worked in complete darkness since snow constantly cut the city's power. So when I found out that I actually lost about $120 a month by working in comparison to if I just said fuck it and quit, it took all of the energy from every cell in my body for me to stay on that job and not just go home, get well-needed sleep, and apply for welfare in the morning. The whole thing is retarded and in no way incentivizes anyone to get a job. I just want to say that the left has put government programs in place that encourages people to not bother getting married, that makes it easier to get kids out of wedlock and grow up in fatherless homes, and that makes it being not really worth getting even a low-skill job in order to at least acquire some work experience. So low-skill workers stay unemployed because the very act of trying isn't as profitable as just staying on the government dole. And it's all being done, allegedly, to combat poverty. The damage that this has done primarily to minorities is beyond severe, and you need only to look at the statistics regarding crime within these groups to be able to see the suffering that these policies have caused. The left have successfully attacked several of the most crucial components that keep people out of poverty. Marriage, strong family unit, the man and the woman working as a team to raise their children, the present and involved father, the will of people to work in order to gain economic freedom, free from state dependency and apathy. If you're gonna have kids, first get married, then have kids, then work as hard as you can on making that marriage last, because your kids will thank you for it. I'll never apologize for being white or for being a man, but I will concede that being brought up with 2 married parents did set me up for a great start in life. So I could easily add more to this list, but please give me a line in the comments if you want me to mention some more success stories about how social justice warriors on the left have stood up for the little man and fought for justice and equality. And with that, I'm gonna end this video by saying take care and thank you very much for watching. Bye.